The class on Exodus is about over. We've almost done it. And so, good morning. And if you're watching on the live stream, good morning to you. And if you're watching later online, hello, or whatever time of day it is for you, good morning. It may as well be. We're in, good day, yeah. We're in Exodus 33, 4 today. If you would like, for next week, look at about 34 and 40. And if you're turning and you get to 40, you realize, well, that's it. Yeah, that's about it. So when I say we're about done, next week is the last week for the Exodus study. That gets us to November 23rd, right? The Advent study will begin on the 30th, and that takes us into December. I don't know for sure, but I think we will probably do what we've done in years past and not have a Sunday school class on the 28th of December. And it's possible, I know we've done this sometimes too, we might not have classes on the 21st, just the way the calendar works with Christmas and New Year's. So stay tuned. We may be here. We'll be in town on the 21st. So if we're having class on the 21st, we'll be here. Not a problem. But that's kind of where we are. Is this study of Exodus is almost finished. And I don't know how long it's been since you've looked at Exodus, but for me it has been a long time. At least 20 years since I taught through Exodus, and even then it was pretty brief. I did one Old Testament semester when I taught, and we did Genesis through Joshua. Is that right? No, Genesis through Deuteronomy. That was ambitious to try that with high school kids. If you would like, and you want to read ahead, that'd be where I would point you, chapter 34 and 40. Now, if you have a songbook in front of you, and there's one place, I'm not gonna sing, so no fear, no worries there. It'd be best for all that I not. But 770. If you have a songbook at home, you may want to look up, Dear Lord and Father of Mankind. That's the first line of the first phrase. That's also usually the title of this hymn. So if you got a songbook at home and you want to look this up, you can look it up. If you're watching at home, that means you're already watching online. If you want to go over to YouTube and pull this up and listen to it, there you go. And you don't have a songbook, well, you don't necessarily need one. Dear Lord and Father of Mankind. Our pew hymnal, John Greenleaf Whittier does the lyrics for this. I want to look at a phrase in this hymn in a few minutes. Okay. Kevin and I do not coordinate. He graciously opens our class with prayer. We didn't coordinate, but you prayed about faith, and that is at the heart of what we look at in this section of Exodus, which is about chapter 32, 33. So this theme, help our faith, that Kevin prayed, that's here. That is all over this section. Last week, it was a pretty extensive run. Chapter 25, 6, 7, 8, 9, 30. It's a pretty extensive set of instructions to build the tabernacle, the physical place where the sacrifices were to happen, and all of the accoutrements that you need to do those sacrifices. the altar, the furniture, the furnishings, the construction, all of the things. Okay? So what chapters, basically 25 through 30, 31, it ends with this paragraph about, and I will bless the skilled workers or craftsmen as they execute this plan. I want you to follow this plan precisely and accurately and very carefully to build all of this as a place where sacrifice will happen. Okay, it's all quite detailed. They're not building it, they're just getting instructions to build. Okay, all of this kind of gets tied back to, you remember there's a phrase when God first meets Moses, I want you to bring my people out of Egypt so they may worship me on the mountain. So, without getting lost in the weeds of the details of the instructions, which is interesting in its own way, take a step back and see the broad sweep of what we're trying to accomplish. Is what we're trying to do is get the people of God in the land promised to them at the same time, at the same place. So all the way through Exodus and even back into Genesis, there's always been this uneasy situation where we often, more often than not, don't have the promised people in the promised land at the same time, the same place. So you remember back to the promise to Abram, I will give you this land. Come out and I will take you to a land I'm going to show you. And in this land I will make you a great people. Okay? At the time, there was no great people. It was Abram. It was the pair of them, all right? So they up and left and they came into the land, but there's not people. There's just the pair of them. And then the struggle with the family, we're on a trajectory to get to peoplehood, but the family winds up out of the land down in Egypt. Meanwhile, they grow into a great people, but they're not in the land. So now we're going to leave Egypt and come back into Palestine, into the land of Israel, the promised land. We're going to get the people and the land at the same time, the same place. All of this is part of the promise to Abram. Okay, so what's the promise to Abram? That we will bless through this people, in this place, all people in all places. Because that's the backdrop of Genesis 11 and Genesis 10 before Abram shows up in Genesis 12, which is all of these people. If you look at the Tower of Babel story in Genesis 11, it's everybody everywhere that ever was anywhere at all times, right? It's a very wide scope. And what all of the people do is they're going to kind of come together and build this tower. What we want is we want them to spread out and fill the earth, but instead they come together and build a city and build a name and build a tower. Okay, so it's kind of all the people come together. What we need is all the people to spread out. So against that backdrop of everybody, we have one person, Abram, who will be blessed for the sake of all people. What does that have to do with the color of the fabric hanging on the side of the tabernacle? Okay, that's a valid question, worth asking. That's what I want to look at today. So in Exodus, all of the instructions about the way you build the tabernacle and the furnishings and the accoutrements and all of the things advance the storyline of getting the people, the promised people in the promised land for the purpose of the promise, and to get them kind of situated in their right mind, so to speak, to be, I don't want to say useful because that implies they're just kind of tools, but so that they will be useful to advance the storyline of the promise. We have a task before us, and this people needs to be fashioned into a people fit for the task before them. Okay? They need to be taught for the sake of the purpose, the long-range purpose of blessing all people in all places through us here. At least that's what I see as I go back and read all of Genesis and Exodus, kind of from the beginning through kind of the widest angle possible. Okay. The obstacle in front of us is, your version probably stiff-necked. That's what our Pew Bible says. The obstacle in front of us is a stiff-necked people. If you want to look at Exodus 32, verse 9. I have seen these people, and they are stiff-necked. Okay? I know you. I joked. By the time you've taught high school kids, in a sense, every day is different. You cannot make any predictions. You cannot make any assumptions. You never know what they're going to do, okay? The flip side of that is if you've seen one 14-year-old boy, you've seen all of them. There's nothing you can do that will surprise me. I have seen your kind before, okay? I don't know exactly how you're going to manage to swing by your feet from the light fixtures, but it won't surprise me. I know what you're up to, okay? Not to be too flippant, but I have seen these people. I know these people. Okay, so just pause here for a moment. What we're seeing as we go through this story is, I think, we're seeing it play out for us, the things we already know about this people. So as we go through Exodus 32, 33, as you read through these stories, and some of them are, I think, pretty challenging to kind of have, what is the inner coherence that binds them together, it could be pretty tricky. I think, for me at least, what has been helpful is to take a step back and consider the people who are reading Exodus already know this story. If we take the most conservative interpretation of the authorship of this book, this is written by Moses right after the events. Well, it's no surprise to anyone that what has happened. Okay? Now, they may not have lived through it, but if this is after the 40 years, okay, they wander for 40 years, and Exodus is written at the end of the 40 years, it's not a surprise. They know this. Now, they, in some cases, ignorant of the details, perhaps, kind of like we were ignorant of the details, but I think all of us kind of grew up in church homes, and we kind of knew the stories. As we grow, we learn the stories better, okay? If we can read the stories. If we can't read, we listen, and in the telling and retelling for people who cannot read, they absorb more and more of the details and more of the sequence. They can put the stories in sequence and get a larger flow, but you've heard them. I wouldn't discount the idea that some folks have never heard this before. This is the first time. Sure. I think, though, the people who are reading Exodus already know the story. They know, and if we move past, and we know this was used after Moses, I think we find a certain reuse of this after the exile from Babylon. They know the story. And again, back to what I said at the beginning, what's the biggest, broadest kind of frame of reference here is they know what it's like to not be in the promised land. So the great crisis of the exile was we once were the promised people in the promised land, and we are not. We're barely one and certainly not in the other. We're hardly a people. We're not the people we once were. And we're not where we should be. Okay? So if you're telling and retelling your story, like, well, you're not at home. Well, where's home? Home is back in the land of Canaan. Well, where are we? We're in Babylon. How did we get here if we're supposed to be there? Okay? If you remember, at the family reunions, there's probably the go-to stories that get told and retold every time. Well, how is it we wound up in Texas? Okay? Because ain't none of us planted here, right? We're all transplants from somewhere else. Well, we came, probably very particular. We came because of insert, the reason why, and then you tell about how we did it and all the comings and goings of how we got here. Or it was way back in 18 whenever that there was some opportunity, our ancestor was chasing gold or running from the law in Kentucky or whatever it was that brought us out here, and you go and you retell. Well, how it is that did we come to be here? If they're reading Exodus right after the events, this is familiar to them. We know how it is we got here. If they're reading Exodus during the reigns of David and Solomon when things were great, we need to know how it is we got here. If they're reading Exodus after the exile, pick one, Assyrian or Babylonian, works for either Israel or Judah. How did we get here? So in a sense, I think they already know. Back to Kevin's prayer, the essence is, here's this people who've called to be like their ancestor Abram and trust in Yahweh, and who have failed, who have not. Okay, as soon as he brings us out, we have all the instructions in place, the scaffolding in place to order our common life for the purpose that God has called us out of Egypt for. We turn and make a calf and say, these are our gods. Okay? So I think they already know how it has happened. What we need to see is explanation of how it happened. Things need to be clearer for us. We may have information, but we need some transformation as a group. We may have knowledge, but we need understanding of what it means. Well, if you look, for example, at chapter 31, there's this paragraph here about observing the Sabbath that ties everything back to creation. There is a sense of order built into our existence. And Israel as a nation must, in their own national life, practice this Sabbath, because God, who created the world and ordered it and sustained it, sustains us. And we did not come out of Egypt because we were mighty or strong. We came out of Egypt because God is gracious and he honors his promise. So as we work in the fields, the most dangerous thing that we could, trap we could fall into is we must work every day or we just won't make it. No. You and your livestock and everyone else, the donkey too, you will not work on the Sabbath. Not because it's your work that feeds you, it's because it is Yahweh who sustains all of creation. So that paragraph in 31:12, observe my Sabbaths, it comes right on the heels of all of the instructions about the tabernacle and the color of cloth on the walls. Okay? Which means what? Which means that the very essence of their existence, what really binds them together as a nation, in a sense, is we are the nation that practices Sabbath. Also, but what binds them to God's work from the beginning is their reliance and their trust, their faith, that Yahweh, who sustains the world, will also sustain me. That's why I don't work on the Sabbath. Not because, it's not that it's not that there's for lack of work. When you live by the work of your hands, in some sense, the work never ends. I don't work because there's no work to do. I work because it is Yahweh who sustains us. And I think that's why the stakes are so high when you look and see things like verse 15. There's a couple of extreme statements. Here is one, a couple, further on in chapter 32, we'll have some people killed, and you think, boy, the stakes are high. Why are the stakes so high? Yeah, that's pretty, yeah. It's harder to get higher stakes than that. Okay. High stakes mean high importance. It is foundational. As I read through Genesis, Exodus, and see these pretty extreme statements, put to death one who does not work on the Sabbath. In chapter 32, who's on our side? Not on our side? Draw your swords. Go through the crowd, boys. Oh, I didn't expect that coming. That's in 32:27. Okay, get your sword out. That seems like a little much. What gives? Okay, I think all of the Egyptians who oppose us, the nations who oppose us, where does that happen? It happens where, in some sense, there is opposition to the fundamental order of creation, the fundamental identity of Yahweh, disobedience to what he intends for his people. In other words, it's a strike at the root of their identity. So therefore the stakes are high. That may not be totally satisfactory. I'm more and more comfortable not trying to explain the hard edges of that away. I want to understand it, but at some point, again, me personally, Yahweh has every prerogative. He does not owe me anything. And the nature of what he intends to do for the world is, first and last, gracious and glorious. So it seems to me like these very high stakes only show up where you have folks who are opposing that at some basic root level. And that can't stand. That kind of community, that's not who we will be. That may not take all the hard edges off. I am more comfortable with that, and I don't feel as intent to try to find an alternative explanation. It may not be very satisfactory. Okay, but let's keep going.
Let me ask you a question.
Yes.
Discuss a little bit to what extent we as Christians are supposed to observe in keeping the Sabbath holy.
Okay.
Sabbath is just a holy day. So our holy day, I guess, is Sunday. And I know the Sabbath back then was called a day of rest.
That's right.
Sunday today supposed to be a day of rest?
A day of rest. So, yes, if you look at, for example, 31:13, observe my Sabbaths so that you will know that I am the Lord who consecrates you. So here we are. We're the Jews. We've left Egypt. We're coming into the land. I keep this Sabbath because it is the Lord who consecrates me. Yahweh has set me apart. He has set us apart. That's what a consecration is. We're set apart, or in a sense, holy. We're not like the rest. There's something different. So this day is different. It's not like the rest. We consecrate the day because the Lord consecrates us. So what we do on this day reflects what God does for us, which is what? Sustains us, and we do not eat because we are skilled farmers. We eat because God honors His promise. This whole creation rests in God's provision and has since day 1. No, since day 7. This is for you forever, okay, all the generations. Okay, you do your work on 6 days, but on the 7th is a Sabbath of complete rest. I'm looking at verse 15, holy to the Lord. So it's a day of rest, a holy day. Okay, interesting. You look in Hebrews, and the author of Hebrews makes an argument about how the rest that God gives us is open, and I want you to enter into His rest. So I think how Christians approach this rest, and that rest language is Sabbath language, is how they approach this rest is in Jesus Christ we have rest, and we have been set apart. So the themes of holiness and being set apart, of my reliance upon God because what He has done for me finds its ultimate fulfillment in Jesus. Is there the explicit, now we're going to do a different day, folks. I know you've kind of gotten used to Saturdays, but let's switch it over to Sunday. So you don't see that kind of amendment, as it were, to the books. But what you do see is Christians will honor what God has decisively done in Jesus on the day of His resurrection. So from the beginning, it looks like if they're Jews, they may have honored the Sabbath because that's what Jews do, but they're meeting for Lord's Supper on the day of resurrection. And it looks like, historically, as the church moves out of Jewish circles, keeping that Sabbath is not as important, and it becomes exclusively Sunday.
I remember hearing the
Yes.
expression as kind of a justification that we don't really have to keep this. People would say, well, I know that we're not supposed to work, but I have an ox in the ditch.
Right.
That was always the expression to
Yes.
justify doing whatever you wanted to on Sunday. But I still kind of think of Sunday as being a day of rest.
Well, I was going to say, our national laws used to reflect a similar ethos. Do you remember,
The blue law.
about to say, when here were the grocery stores still closed on Sunday? Is 1985 fair enough, 40 years ago?
My dad was a farmer and he didn't work on Sundays. He didn't go out and plow the field and do things on Sundays.
I think in practice, a lot of us, I say us, a lot of us kind of practice Sabbath on Sundays. That is, that was the day we didn't work. That was, again, I'm thinking rural 19th century America. That was the day to go to meeting and to not work. Therefore, and in some ways the legislation comes, therefore we will not, businesses in this town close on Sundays. Thank you.
It has been just accepted in the last few years that it was all right to call Sunday a Sabbath.
out in West Tennessee, was things pretty well closed on Sundays? I assume it was here.
When I was growing up in Tennessee, no.
That's how it was in Middle Tennessee. Most, as I remember, again, I say 1985 because as a kid, I think there was 2 gas stations that if in Hendersonville, Tennessee, if you needed to get gas, there were 2 places you could go on Sundays. Most of the rest were closed on Sundays. Now, the further you drove in towards Nashville, all bets were off, things will be open. If you're in Hendersonville, Tennessee, up until I'd say the mid to late 80s, on Sundays, your chances of finding anything open before noon were pretty slim. It seems like McDonald's opened around 11. I don't think they were open at 5:30 on Sunday mornings. I think most gas stations were closed. I know grocery stores were closed. You could go to Kroger. That was the only place to go if you needed groceries. And now everything is open all the time. Well, let's look at 770, Dear Lord and Father of mankind. Since we're talking about Sabbath, there's a phrase here that the Sabbath establishes a kind of order and rhythm. It's a rhythm because it's every week, every 7th day. The 7th day happens every week. Okay, so there's a cyclical movement in the creation week. Okay, 1 through 6, then 7, then you start over. Do that 4 times is 28 days. Do that, so there's a connection to the orderliness of, even the rotation of the stars and the moons and the planets and all of this, okay? There's an orderliness to it. There's a rhythm to it. It happens every 7 days. The essence, again, for Christians, the essence of what God has done for us in Jesus is right there. It's totally aligned with the essence of what He's done to uphold all of creation. That's reflected when the Jews they don't thresh wheat on Saturday. Why? Because Yahweh sustains us. So what God has done in Jesus is He has acted for us. He sets us apart. He sustains us. And Sunday as a day of worship, we formally order our rhythm, order our week by weekly coming together in assembly to remember that. So there are some analogies or parallels to a weekly observance of Sabbath. Okay, the point of this is to fashion a people fit for the purpose at hand. This phrase, ordered lives confess the beauty of thy peace. It's the last phrase of stanza 4, of verse 4, Dear Lord and Father of mankind. Well, you could do the whole song, but if you look at stanza 4, drop thy still dews of quietness. Okay? Rest and quiet. Okay? Till all our strivings cease, whatever it is you're striving for. Until they're done. The prayer here is, give me a drop here and a drop there. One day it will be done. One day my strivings will cease. But until then, a little bit of quietness, a little bit of quietness, a little bit of quietness. Take from our souls the strain and stress, and let our ordered lives confess the beauty of thy peace. That's a great hymn. So the beauty of our ordered lives reflects the beauty of what God has done. The orderliness of the rhythm of honoring Sabbath for Israel reflects Yahweh's action in creation. There's no striving, there's no working. In some sense, I grew up in the suburbs. Okay, so I only know this indirectly. When you work, it's hard work. Again, my Tennessee, all on both sides of my family, my Tennessee grandparents, they were dirt poor. They were sharecroppers. They worked hard to not have to do that. You know, it was kind of the quintessential American dream. They worked hard so they wouldn't have to do that. When you're working, it's hard work. Often could be swept away with a single storm. So there's strain and stress. Take away our strain and stress. Let our ordered lives confess the beauty of thy peace. Well, time's going to run away from us. That's where Israel needs to be. Okay? The question is, will they get there or not? Well, it's an open question. Well, let's next week look at chapter 34, chapter 40, and we'll move on and we'll close out this study. It's only 9:46.